The morning brought an unsettling feeling as the faint light of dawn pierced through a sky heavy with thick clouds. Memories of the past we shared resurfaced, like ghosts, filled with both joy and regret, with decisions that altered everything I once knew. The moment had arrived, one that no preparation could ever ease. Reflecting back was bittersweet, a blend of youthful dreams and the lessons learned through time. Our journey here had been rough, like shattered glass, reflecting both love, mistakes, and quiet forgiveness. Yet, despite it all, we stood together, where silence often spoke louder than words. A light rain began to fall as we gathered by her grave, each of us lost in personal memories. Some were in tears, hands shaking with quiet sorrow. Others stood in solidarity, offering support to those most affected. I wasn't there out of obligation, but to mark the end of a chapter we all shared. I also needed closure, seeing her in the casket, watching it close so I could finally move on. My presence was also for my children. Oddly enough, we were the least tearful of everyone. Perhaps we understood Heidi better than anyone. As I scanned the crowd, a few familiar faces met mine, offering nods or smiles. I returned them, sensing their silent condolences. Some, mostly men, and a few women, avoided my gaze, focusing their attention elsewhere. I wished I could show them that my resentment had died with Heidi. Then, in that moment, a small, suntanned hand slipped into mine. In front of everyone, I knelt beside the woman holding my hand, resting my head against her nearly 8-month pregnant belly. My daughter smiled, and a wave of unexpected joy rippled through the gathering. The gesture resonated deeply, reminding everyone of the cycle of life, death and birth, opposites yet forever intertwined. I smiled inwardly for a different reason. Heidi would have despised it. For once, the attention wasn't on her. This was supposed to be her final act, but now, all eyes were on my child. I whispered to myself, I'm a grown man. This would be my 4th child. I already had 3 grown children with Heidi. David stood beside me, with Sarah at his side and Sasha further to the right. At nearly 60, I had learned that holding on to anger only corrodes. By the time Heidi passed, any hatred I had for her had long dissipated. Looking at our children, I knew I could never truly hate her. They were proof of that. Without her, they wouldn't exist as they do. I let go of my resentment years ago. Holding on to anger serves no one, and Heidi no longer had a place in my life. I still wouldn't mind seeing her become Cerberus snack, I thought with a grin, but I didn't linger on the thought. The last time I saw Heidi alive was 5 months ago at our son David's Thanksgiving gathering. I remembered that day as the minister began to speak. It was a warm November evening in Florida, almost like summer. A solitary figure walked along the beach, his shoulders tense, heading toward 2 beach chairs, the only marks on the otherwise untouched sand. The chairs were side by side, just inches apart but facing opposite directions. In one, a gray-haired man sat watching the waves, occasionally rising to toss stones into the sea, glancing back toward the car in the driveway of the nearby house. A woman sat in the other chair, half my age at 29. Our birthdays were just a day apart. My eyes, once blue, had turned gray over time, my intense gaze contrasting with her calm brown eyes. Her tanned skin, more a reflection of her Mexican heritage than the sun, and her long brown hair tied in a ponytail, gave her an air of tranquility while I remained restless. Neither of us noticed the angry figure approaching on the sand. "James, we should rest," she said in perfect English. "We are resting," I responded. "We're not doing anything strenuous. You're the one who keeps pacing and tossing things into the water. Watching you is exhausting." I settled back down, understanding why she had arranged the chairs to face each other, close enough for us to maintain eye contact or share a kiss. Focused on me and her iPad, she didn't notice him until he was almost upon us. He was just under 6 feet, well-built, and about 20 years younger than I was. I was calculating his age when his fist came toward me. It felt absurd, a young man attacking someone nearing retirement. I caught his fist and swept his legs out from under him, pinning him down. His anger met my experience, balancing the struggle until a metallic click ended it. If you move, I'll shoot, Samantha said, pressing a tool to his head. My son, David, froze, his eyes wide with shock and fear. Samantha cursed fluently in Spanish, and I couldn't help but laugh. Sam, don't shoot him, I said. A funeral would be an ordeal, and Michigan's too cold for a trip now, she replied, still irritated. Dave, have you noticed how her accent thickens when she's angry? She'll be speaking Aztec soon. Is this David? Your son? She asked, her eyes wide. I nodded, smiling. And you were going to shoot him? She added. I still could, she muttered, lowering the Colt. David, I asked calmly, why travel 1,200 miles just to confront me? And how did you find me? Top investigator. She's a family friend of Uncle Chance's girlfriend, David said. Sarah Price from the Rios agency? I finished for him. Samantha groaned and moved her chair next to mine, sitting with clear frustration, resuming her reading or pretending to. Dad? David hesitated. Why is she so upset? Rios is her uncle. Sarah's one of her best friends, I explained. They didn't know you were looking for me. I rarely use my full name here, so Sarah probably didn't connect the dots. So, why are you here? It's rough at home, he said. Mom's not well, mentally or physically. She's been diagnosed with some mysterious illness, but we don't know if she's hiding it from us or if doctors really can't figure it out. I shrugged, feigning ignorance. Samantha and David both watched me closely. I'm not a doctor, I said. I have a small business here, successful enough to delay full retirement. Life here is pricier than Michigan, so I need to work to ensure my wife and child will be secure when I'm gone. You're not leaving, Sam said quietly. I meant when I die, I replied. And I meant what I said, she laughed. Even God knows your mind until I let go. David looked at us, confused. I don't know what I can do or how this involves me, I said. What about everything you taught us growing up? David snapped. About responsibility and doing the right thing? I came here to ask you to come home, to help Mom. You left without warning when she was hurt, without a reason, leaving her without support. Samantha muttered curses in Spanish, making me chuckle. You really don't know? I said. Know what? David's voice grew sharper. You abandoned your family for a younger woman and pretended to be married here in Miami, while Mom suffered and we struggled to support her. What a liar, I muttered. What a liar, Sam echoed. David stood up, angry. Don't insult my mother, he said, as Sam raised her magnum again. Enough, I said. Sam, put the magnum away. David, let's talk inside. You'll understand. You agree your mom is lying? Sam added. And if I don't? David asked. I'll go back to Michigan with you, I replied. We moved to the terrace, and Sam brought us beer. Who told you I left Mom without money? I asked. She did, David said. She's been living with us ever since, and we've had to... I burst out laughing, which only seemed to fuel David's anger. Why so serious? I said. You know, you're just like me, leaving him on the terrace. I fetched a stack of papers and handed them to him. What is this? He asked. The file for the sale of our house, I said. I made sure she received over $400,000 when I left. I showed him proof of the check. If she didn't have money, what did she do with it? She never told us, he said, stunned. Exactly, I replied. Your mom always needs someone to support her. With me gone, you stepped in. If you knew she had nearly $500,000, would you have expected her to rent her own place? She needed to seem broke. How did you get these? David asked. I gave her the house and the divorce, I said. Are you divorced? He asked. Yes, I replied. I couldn't marry Sam otherwise. But Mom said. I filed for divorce, but she refused to sign, attend meetings, or show up in court. Eventually, a warrant was issued, but no one wanted to arrest her. Now I know she was hiding at your place. I moved here because this state allows default divorces. After enough time, the divorce is finalized even if one party refuses. I could have kept everything, but still gave her the house. David's frustration returned. She never told us. She always needs to be the center of attention. Check the rest of the file. What are these envelopes? He asked. When I left, you were working in Alaska, unreachable, and your sisters were in college. I sent the divorce info and checks for each of you. What happened to them? They disappeared, while everything else remained. How much were they for? He asked. $10,000 each, I replied. David stormed off the deck, kicking the tree in frustration. I thought you three just sided with your mom during the divorce, I said. I figured I was left out. None of you ever reached out. Not on my birthday, Christmas, or Father's Day. I assumed you didn't want to hear from me. You seem to have settled in well, David said, glancing around. And she's beautiful. Are you really married? Yes, I said. She's everything I once hoped your mom would be. But Dad, how old is she? He pressed. She just turned 29. She's kind and protective, and she's pregnant. A boy. So I'll finally get the little brother I wanted, but at 38, he laughed. And my stepmom's younger than Sarah and Sasha. Wow, he muttered. Sorry, ma'am, but this feels like living in the Matrix. I almost regret coming. Every word you say exposes another lie Mom told, David continued. She had us believing you ran off with your secretary. We even confronted Carol Brady, your former secretary, demanding answers. My name's Samantha, or Sam, she corrected him. Dad, how do I explain this to Sarah and Sasha? They wanted me to bring you back to face Mom and support her, he said. Don't tell them yet, I said. But why? They deserve the truth. They do. And that's why I'll come for Thanksgiving. We'll clear it all up. Keep the gathering small, just us, Sam added. 6 with Kelly, David said. And I can't leave my wife out, he added. Justin makes 8, David said. Why Justin? I asked, uncharacteristically sharp. David looked surprised. He was dating Sarah when you left. They're married now. He's not my favorite, but she loves him. I nodded. Fine, make sure he's there too. 3 days later, I arrived at David's place, already feeling irritated. The cold, windy weather in Michigan wasn't ideal for Sam, who was used to Florida's warmth. I bought her a new fur coat, which I knew would draw some laughs. It was 45 degrees, and she looked ready for the Arctic. My frustration, though, wasn't just about the weather. I had expected that. It was the car. I had planned to rent a Hertz Mustang GTH, known for its high performance and history dating back to the 60s when Ford made them for racing enthusiasts. But when we arrived at Detroit Metro, all they had was a V6 convertible. It was a bad omen for the trip. As Sam shivered, I put my arm around her and headed for the door. Before we could even reach the porch, the door flew open, and Sarah launched herself at me. Almost 60, but still fit, she hugged me fiercely, and I managed to stay upright as she squeezed me tight. I carried her inside without letting her feet touch the ground. Sam smiled, watching us. Sasha, more cynical, spoke up. Nice, Sarah. Way to show him how much you're holding a grudge, she said sarcastically. I smiled back. Sarah turned to glare at Sasha and flipped her off. Forget you, Dad's home. David walked in with Kelly, who immediately noticed Sam's long fur coat and nudged David, pointing at it. Don't start, David said sharply. Kelly asked, What do you mean, honey? For Sam's coat. They probably used 20 or 30 minks, David replied. That's about $4,000 or $5,000. For you, we'd need a mortgage, and minks would go extinct. Sam's sharp breath showed her shock at David's remark. We're about the same size, Sam said quickly. You could probably fit in this one. I like her, Kelly smiled. Honey, I couldn't even get an arm in that coat, Kelly laughed. I know I'm bigger, but Dave wouldn't have it any other way. Everyone turned their attention to Sam. David pretended to search her for tools, then hugged her, leading us into the living room. My daughters eyed Sam curiously. It wasn't surprising to see them together, but Heidi sitting on the couch with her feet up while Justin pretended to watch a football game felt surreal. Kelly announced that she needed to check on the turkey and headed to the kitchen, with Sam following her. Stay and settle in, honey, Kelly said. I thought one of the others would help, Sam replied, her accent more noticeable now as nerves made her more self-conscious, drawing attention from everyone except David and me. Even Heidi glanced at Sam, while Justin's eyes followed her every move. Heidi's expression shifted to fear as she looked at me. I smiled and shook my head. Hi, Jim, Heidi said. Can I get a hug? It's a holiday. Even David hugged his friend. She's not his friend, I said bluntly. And I heard you were sick. If I hugged you the way I wanted, you'd stop breathing. You used to hug me like that, she said. It made me feel loved and safe, I said. Yes, but now I grab your throat, I added. I hope we could move past this. Heidi responded, her voice fragile as she attempted to act as she always had. Dad, if Sam isn't David's friend, then who is she? Sarah asked. Justin perked up, eager for the answer. Before I could respond, Kelly returned with a tray of drinks. She handed me a Dos Equis Amber, gave Justin a bottle, and served Sarah and Heidi white wine, while Sasha took tea. David got a bottle of homebrew, and as Kelly turned, he playfully attempted to smack her. She dodged, grinning. No chance, she said, laughing. Why don't I get to choose my drink? Justin complained. You can, Kelly replied sweetly, once you get a job and pay for something. Turning to Sam, Kelly asked, what would you like? Wine or beer? I can't drink alcohol, Sam said quietly. Worried it's unfeminine? Kelly teased. No, just pregnant, Sam said, smiling. All eyes shifted to Sam. Justin's jaw dropped, while Sarah and Sasha's expression softened. Women seemed more accepting when pregnancy was involved, and suddenly, my daughters were Sam's biggest fans. Congratulations, Sasha said. Are you in touch with the father? Yes, very much, Sam replied, smiling. I love him dearly. Both daughters reacted warmly, even Sasha. Heidi, on the other hand, pursed her lips tighter. So, Sam, Sarah continued, are you Dave's colleague or something? David looked unsure, so I stepped in. Sarah, Sam has the same relationship with David as she does with you and Sasha. What does that mean? Justin blurted out, realizing too late he shouldn't have spoken. She's his stepmother, I said, taking her coat and sitting beside her. The room fell silent, jaws dropping. But Dad, you can't be married to her. You're still married to Mom, Sarah said. So, Heidi, you haven't told them we're divorced? I asked, as all eyes turned to Heidi, who glared at me. It didn't feel like the right time, Heidi said with a sly smile. I didn't want to upset them with news that might break the family apart. Is that why you didn't tell them you took their money? I asked. What does he mean? Sasha demanded. I wanted to hold on to it until they were responsible enough to handle it, Heidi stammered. Anyone under 30? Raise your hand, I said. Only Sam raised hers. Oh, James, how young is she? Heidi said, I can't believe you got someone younger than your daughter's pregnant. Forget that, Sasha interrupted. Let's talk about the money and the divorce. Heidi coughed. I think I need medicine, she said, trying to get up. It looks like you're trying to leave, I mocked. She sat back down, crossing her arms. Fine, she snapped. Your father left without a word while I was in the hospital. Later, I got divorce papers but refused to sign them. I thought he'd return if he didn't hear from you. So, I hid the letters and checks he sent. That might sound believable except for one thing, I said. The checks were cashed and deposited in your account. You stole from them. I'm sorry, Heidi said. I was alone and thought I might need it for emergencies. If they didn't know about the money, they wouldn't miss it. How much were the checks? Sarah asked. $10,000 each, Heidi admitted. $10,000? Sasha shouted, glaring at her mother. Kelly came in, drawn by the noise. You left me with nothing, Heidi said, attempting to calm Sasha. I shook my head and laughed. What's funny, Dad? Sasha asked. Your mom's lying again, I replied. Maybe she forgot. Forgot what? Sasha pressed. The house sale, I said. Back to the money, Dad, Sasha interjected. That could help me go back to school and get my MBA. I thought you abandoned us, but now I find out Mom deceived us. I'm sorry, I said. I loved your mother deeply. Even when I left, I made sure she wasn't without funds. I arranged the house sale and gave her everything. Dad, we know, Sarah said. Mom told us the house was damaged, and after taxes and fees, she got less than $5,000, most of which went to medical bills, I said. She was placed in a care facility after treatment, fully paid for. She got more than she said. Can we talk about this after dinner? Kelly asked. You want to hear this? David said. Mom, how much did you get for the house? A little over $400,000, Heidi said softly. But I was going to... How much? Kelly asked, her anger rising. Why are you even living with us? We didn't have a baby because you took over our guest room. We don't charge you rent. You don't help. and we serve you while you sit on that money. Kelly stood over Heidi, with Sasha and Sarah beside her. Let's save this for after dinner, I said, smiling. Minutes later, we sat down at the table, snow falling outside. I realized we'd need to leave earlier than planned for the airport. Driving the Mustang in the snow would be an adventure. Even though the rental was a V6, it still packed over 300 horsepower. When we entered the dining room, only a few of us were calm. Justin kept talking about being hungry, and Sam and I missed our usual affection. I pulled her in for a kiss as we walked to the table. Dad, you'll sit at the head, Kelly said. I took my seat, but a problem arose when both Sam and Heidi tried to sit to my left. Mom, sit on the other side, Kelly suggested, trying to avoid conflict. You'll still be close to Dad. I always sit on the left. It's the hard side, Heidi insisted. Sam, calm, noted Heidi's sudden burst of energy, despite her weak act moments earlier. Heidi coughed dramatically, leaning on the table as she found her seat. Help me sit, darling? Heidi asked. Sam frowned at her choice of words. Here's your place, I said, pointing to her chair. Really, Mom? Sasha sighed. We're not that gullible. David mimed handing something to Heidi, making everyone pause. He laughed, and we all took our seats. Sam sat on my left, holding my hand, with Sarah beside her and Sasha next to Sarah. Heidi sat to my right with Justin across from Sarah. David sat at the other end, with Kelly on his left. Everything okay, Dad? Kelly asked as I looked around. Later, I replied, noting each man sitting with their partner on the left, except for Sarah. Everyone stand, I said. Heidi struggled to get up as Sasha rolled her eyes. I said grace, thanking God for bringing us together, David for hosting, Kelly for preparing the meal, and my daughters for welcoming me back. I hinted at wanting Sasha to give me a grandson, which made Sarah laugh. Finally, I thanked Sam for filling my life with love. What about Justin, Dad? Sarah asked. We're married now, I said, rolling my eyes, and Justin's face fell. What about me, honey? Heidi chimed in. Kelly lowered her head, sensing what was coming. Heidi, I'm grateful I left Michigan and found a better life, I said. Heidi, unfazed, replied, we had great times, and our children can attest to that. Before she could continue, Sam stood up, walked around the table, and punched Heidi in the mouth, sending her crashing to the floor. Justin rushed to pull Sam back, but overdid it, holding her too tightly. I reacted instinctively, throwing a bowl of mashed potatoes at his face. He coughed and spat the food out as Sarah threw the gravy boat at him. Get some sauce for your potatoes, she yelled, hitting him squarely. Sasha added, can't forget cranberry sauce, and dumped a bowl over Justin's head. Stop, stop, Kelly yelled. Justin, wiping his eyes, reached for the turkey. David, quicker than the rest, grabbed it to protect it, but slipped on the mess, sending the turkey flying right into Justin's face. Sam was so furious at Heidi that she didn't even notice Justin on the floor. Heidi seized the moment for payback, but Kelly's scream stopped her just in time. Heidi, surprisingly nimble, lunged forward, but I intercepted her, knocking her down before she could kick Sam. Enough! David shouted. Dad, this has gone too far, Kelly said. No, it hasn't, Kelly replied. Your mother was about to kick a pregnant woman. David's face fell as he looked at me. I nodded. If Kelly hadn't screamed and that kick landed, I would have strangled your mother and gone to jail without regret. You're insane, James, Heidi shrieked. I'm your wife, the mother of your children, and you're defending some girl you barely know. I pulled Sam into my lap. What's behind all this hatred? David demanded. Everyone to the living room. I need the full story. No cleanup, Kelly said firmly while David insisted. We need answers now. Mom, be quiet, Sarah said, interrupting Heidi as she started to speak. We've heard your version. I want the truth. I need to go, Justin said. Sarah will catch me up later. Sit down, Justin, I said, and David added, you don't even have a job. Stay and listen. We moved to the living room. David lit the fire, and everyone settled in. I fell in love with your mom at first sight, I began. It was 1973 at Central Michigan University. I was 19. I saw her walking across campus. Short blonde hair, bright blue eyes, and I was so distracted I walked into a lamppost. You hit a pole for her? Sam teased. I'm going to be sick. She didn't notice me then. 3 days later, we officially met, but not before she stepped on my hand when I was picking up papers. So, did she apologize? Sasha asked. No, she didn't. When we met, she demanded I write a paper for her. I agreed, but only if she went on a date with me. Wait, Sam interrupted. What's an androgynous look? It's a style that's not distinctly masculine or feminine. Back then, women were thin with few curves. It was popular. Men prefer women who look like women, Sam said, smirking. You notice my figure first? Can I finish? I asked, and she nodded. When I finally spoke to your mother, she wasn't apologetic. She told me guys often got distracted because of her, then demanded help with her paper. That's how we began, I said, recalling how quickly my fantasy of her had faded. She burst out laughing, as if it was the funniest thing she'd ever heard. I felt embarrassed and angry, and I started to leave. She limped after me, struggling to keep up in her shoes. All right, it's an emergency, she said. We'll go on one date for work. That has to be at least AB. Deal, I replied. When do you need it? Tomorrow, she said. 25 pages, single-spaced, any topic, 5 footnotes, 3 citations. She gave me her dorm number. Back then, cell phones didn't exist. With time running out, I handed her my coursework, which wasn't due for another week. The next morning, I called her, and she told me where to bring it. When I delivered the papers, she simply said, thanks, and walked away. Hey, what about our date? I called after her. She turned back, smiled, set my papers on a table, and stepped onto the porch with me. There were no word processors or printers back then. I typed everything on a typewriter. Listen, she said, did you really think I was serious? My evenings are booked for the next 3 months, but dating's about making a girl notice you, right? Probably, I answered. She went on, I date a lot of guys, hardly remember them, but I noticed you. That counts for something. Next time I see you, I'll even nod. That nod could get other girls to date you, she added as she returned inside with the papers. I fell silent, while my kids stared at me and Heidi. What a jerk, David said. Dad, you were such a pushover, Sarah added. Back then, everyone thought Heidi would become a famous model, I said. Modeling was just starting to boom, though the pay was far less than now. A couple of months later, Heidi approached me again on campus. Hi, James, she said. Tonight's your evening. What are you talking about? I asked. You're taking me out, she replied. Since our last meeting, I'd heard a lot through word of mouth, as there was no internet back then. Heidi had a reputation for taking advantage of people, and my friends advised me to move on. I had plans for that night, a Kiss concert at Olympia Stadium with a ticket promised to my best friend. But Heidi's intense look made me reconsider. She got the ticket. When do we meet? She asked. 6, I said. The concert starts at 7:30. They're opening for the Rockets, I added. What concert, Jimbo? She questioned. Kiss, I replied, excited. She laughed. Are you serious? Why would we watch people in more makeup than me, shouting like monsters? That's not music, just noise. We should get to know each other as adults. I'll come by your dorm at 10. Don't forget the wine, she said. I was faced with a dilemma. My favorite band or an unpredictable evening with Heidi. It felt like a moment where I had to choose between 2 paths. I picked the unknown. That night, I met Heidi at 10. She was punctual, oddly so. I was anxious. It was my first time drinking. A cheap, terrible wine that made me feel sick. Yet, she stayed, and it changed my view of her. Why did you stay? I asked. I'm your girlfriend now, she said. She unbuttoned her blouse, guiding my hand to her chest. Even though she didn't have much, kissing her brought more joy than touching her did. But I still did it because she liked it. We were intimate, and I felt over the moon like I was truly alive for the first time. I felt confident, like I had discovered life's greatest secrets. It was like that moment when Neo rescues Morpheus and starts believing he is the one. How foolish I was. Afterward, she gave me a kiss and quietly left my dorm. The next day began with me feeling on top of the world, but by the end, I was filled with anxiety, desperate for answers. Early that morning, Heidi called me crying. You're such a jerk, she screamed. I trusted you, she sobbed. I'm your girlfriend. Then she hung up. I had no idea what was going on. As usual, I tried to make sense of it and assumed Heidi was upset because our friends found out about us, but I hadn't told anyone. I called her back to apologize, even though I didn't feel guilty. But as soon as she heard my voice, she hung up again. I should have realized something was wrong, but I was too naive. Minutes later, she called back crying. "I'm sorry, Heidi," I pleaded. "I swear I didn't tell anyone. People must have heard you." "I'm not ashamed," she said. "We did it." "You fool. I'm your girlfriend," she continued. "We had to do it." "Then what's wrong?" I asked. "You got me pregnant," she said, her voice breaking into sobs. At that moment, my world came crashing down. My dreams of becoming an engineer and designing advanced car engines seemed to fade away. Stunned, I sat silently, holding the phone. It was the 70s, and even though things had changed a bit since the 60s, an unmarried pregnancy was still big news. "What do we do?" I asked. "There are only two options, idiot," she said. "We either get married or you find money for an in-pregnancy termination. My mom will take us to see the doctor and figure out the cost." "All right," I replied. "Which option do you prefer?" "I'd rather have an in-pregnancy termination," she said. "I want to be a model and can't risk ruining my body. I love you, James, but I'm not ready for marriage." "When are we going?" I asked, still not seeing the trap. "We'll pick you up in 15 minutes, she replied. Meeting Heidi's mom made me realize just how different Heidi was from her parents. Her father would have probably demanded a paternity test if they'd existed back then, but her mom was kind, chubby, and warm. She didn't seem to like me at first. At the doctor's office, we waited together while Heidi's mom shot me sharp glances. I brought her coffee, handed her magazines, and politely answered her questions about my future and commitment to Heidi. Heidi kept repeating, "I want an in-pregnancy termination, and you're paying for it." But her mom smiled at me and said, "If Heidi has to marry, I'd prefer it be you over those other guys she's dated. Maybe you could even calm her down." At the doctor's office, Heidi introduced me as her brother-in-law. We even talked about how she could support us until I graduated. She wanted me to succeed as an engineer so I could take care of Heidi and her future grandchild. The doctor entered with a stack of papers. "How many days late is your period, Heidi?" he asked. 3 weeks, she answered quietly. "I took a home test and it came back positive, so I knew I was pregnant," she added. Suddenly, Heidi's mom stood up and hit her. The doctor looked shocked, and I sat there, stunned and confused by her anger. Heidi's mom told me to leave, so I did. Inside, I could still hear yelling. When they came out, Heidi apologized, and the doctor's staff, having overheard the incident, looked at me with a mix of smiles and pity. On the way home, I asked Heidi's mom, "What was all that yelling about?" "I'm still confused." Heidi and I sat in the back, and I held her hand while her mom, cigarette in hand, turned to look at us. We drove down the highway without seatbelts or airbags, and Heidi's mom barely glanced at the road, only jerking the wheel when absolutely necessary. "Jimmy, my daughter tried to trick you," she said, breaking the silence. "She thought she was pregnant after taking a home test 3 weeks ago. But those tests aren't always accurate," she continued. "Even if she was pregnant, it wouldn't be yours. Last night was your first time together, right?" I nodded, not quite grasping the full picture yet. "You can't get pregnant overnight, honey," she said gently. "Heidi was trying to pass off someone else's baby as yours, hoping you'd either pay for the pregnancy termination or marry her and take care of the baby while she carried on with her carefree life." Tears welled up in my eyes as I frowned, still holding Heidi's hand in mine. Heidi's mom glanced over at me and asked, "Why are you crying?" "I love her," I said softly. "I wanted to marry her." She stopped the car, and the three of us sat there, crying together. We each had our reasons for crying, but somehow it felt good to let it all out. "You're the nicest young man I've ever met," Heidi's mom said as she began to drive again. In the weeks that followed, I buried myself in schoolwork and activities. Rumors about me and Heidi spread like wildfire, and many girls approached me, showing interest. But no matter how much attention I received, I couldn't move on. We don't choose who we fall in love with. And even though there were other attractive, kind women who showed me affection, my heart still belonged to Heidi. I never saw her again. If we crossed paths on campus, she would avoid eye contact and quickly walk away if I tried to approach her. My heart was broken. My dorm mates, who thrived on campus gossip, eagerly shared everything they knew about Heidi, often delighting in the negative stories. But 2 months after that day at the doctor's office, I was almost over it. I finally agreed to go on a date with a cute girl from one of my classes. She wore glasses and had a great personality, along with a curvy figure. We went to the movies and walked back to her dorm, holding hands. She smiled at me, placed her hands on my shoulders, and tilted her head back, clearly signaling that she wanted me to kiss her. I had chewed gum all day to keep my breath fresh. I leaned in, trying to sneak a glance to make sure the kiss would be perfect so that she would want more. Her lips were soft and full, and I already had my arms around her waist. But just before our lips met, fate intervened. I heard an unmistakable screech. "What are you doing?" Heidi shouted. "Why is my boyfriend kissing a fat girl in the middle of the street? Is this some experiment? Some charity?" "James, isn't it enough that you donate money to starving children in Africa? Do you need to kiss fat girls too? You can't save everyone." I stared at her in disbelief. "What do you want, Heidi?" "You're an idiot," she snapped. "I'm your girlfriend. Don't pretend you don't know how this works." "Heidi, I haven't heard from you in 8 weeks, I said. "When I saw you on campus, you ran away." "It was hormones, James," she said, her voice sharp. "And it's your fault." "You're insane," I replied incredulously. "Yes, so what?" she said, smiling slyly. "It's not your fault, but it is about hormones." "I'm 8 weeks pregnant," she added, her tone almost triumphant. "And this time it's real. I've seen a doctor. So guess who the father is?" "I don't know," I said, baffled. "Could be anyone." "No, James, you're the father," she squealed, as if she had won some twisted game. Tired of being manipulated, I demanded a blood test and insisted on speaking with the doctor, Heidi, and her mom. Back then, such requests were rare, but everything lined up, and it seemed I was the only possible father. "No pregnancy terminations," I said firmly. "Fine," Heidi replied. "But I want a ring. I want everyone to know I'm with the father of my child. And I want us married before the baby is born." "We'll marry the day the baby is born," I said. "That way we can do a blood test to be sure." So, we tied the knot, and not long after Dave was born. He went to daycare during the day, so Heidi could chase her dream of becoming a model. But it never really took off. There was always something wrong with her look, too small, too big, or simply not fitting the mold. I didn't care if she never made a dime from modeling. All I wanted was for her to be happy. I worked all day, dropped Dave off at daycare, picked him up in the evening, and took care of him at night. I even cooked, since Heidi spent most of her days running from one appointment to the next, chasing what felt like an elusive big break. But, Dad, didn't she make it eventually? My daughter, Sarah, asked me once. In her living room, in her old house, there are giant photos of her from when she supposedly made the cover of Vogue and other magazines, I told her. "Sarah, sweetheart, it wasn't real," I added, shaking my head. "Look closely at the cover. It doesn't say Vogue. It says Vey. I created them to lift your mom's spirits." By the end of her modeling career, I started to get worried about Heidi. Her ego was fragile, and the industry was harsh. Imagine going from one meeting to the next, only to constantly hear, "You're not what we're looking for." I think Heidi eventually became disillusioned. She no longer approached meetings with the same energy and enthusiasm as before. I believe it had something to do with the changing times, too. The bold, unique looks of the late 70s giving way to a more conservative style. I decided to surprise Heidi at the agency with flowers and take her to lunch. I had just been promoted to team leader at work, which meant more income and respect. I wanted to celebrate by treating my girlfriend and son to a nice day. Everything felt perfect. Heidi often mentioned Phil Jackson, a renowned photographer known for launching the careers of many models. She said he believed she had the potential to be a supermodel. When I arrived at the agency, the receptionist told me that Heidi was in Phil's office working on her portfolio. Excited to see her at work, I walked in. But the excitement quickly drained from me when I saw Heidi on her knees in front of Phil. The scene felt surreal. She stood up, and as she approached me, I realized she was completely naked. It was clear what Phil had intended. I glanced around, my eyes landing on 2 expensive-looking cameras. Phil raised his hand and said, "Please don't," ignoring him. I grabbed the cameras and threw them to the floor with all my strength. then knocked over a shelf filled with about 8 more. I walked out, and Heidi rushed after me, struggling to dress herself while people laughed at her as she followed me barefoot down the street. At the time, I was driving an old '71 Mustang. I didn't care about the Mustangs of the late '70s or the environmental concerns surrounding the gas crisis. I wanted power in my car, and with my good job, I could afford it. The environment had already been damaged by past generations, so I felt justified in indulging. When I got home, I put Dave to bed and called Heidi's mom to come pick her up. She arrived before Heidi even made it back. I explained what had happened, and Heidi's mom sat there, shaking her head in disbelief. While we waited, she chain-smoked, easily going through 2 packs. I remember her holding Dave in her arms, the room quickly filling with smoke. It's surprising we made it through the '80s. When Heidi finally returned home, I took Dave and stepped outside to give her and her mother some space. Heidi kept pleading with me to talk, but her mom pulled her back and said, "He doesn't want to talk to you. You need to give him some time." She took Heidi home, and the phone call started. Over the next 24 hours, Heidi called hundreds of times. A few days later, I agreed to let Heidi visit Dave for the weekend. I planned to go shopping and maybe play some golf while she spent time with him. When she arrived and I was about to leave, she asked, "Where are you going?" "I'm heading out," I replied. She reminded me, "You usually take care of Dave. I don't know how to feed or change him." I sighed. "I was supposed to stay while you visit with him." Heidi kept apologizing, saying how much she missed me. She insisted. Phil forced me to do it. I had no choice, or he wouldn't edit my photos. I felt a wave of anger rising inside me. But she warned me, "Don't make this difficult." It was just a test to help me become a top model. Years later, I learned that Heidi hadn't been entirely honest. She had pursued many photographers and booking agents on her own, trying to secure opportunities. But back then, I believed her. She seemed so genuine, and I was deeply in love with her. She even suggested giving up her career to become a housewife. What could I say? We grew close again, and I promised myself I would never bring it up. The next few years were good. I earned more money, and by the time Dave turned 5, Heidi was expecting again. Sasha was born into a loving family. But again, Heidi cheated on me, this time with Dave's 3rd-grade teacher. I forgave her. We had a few more good years, and Sarah was born. Later, I caught Heidi with our housemate, but I couldn't leave. My love for our 3 children was stronger than anything. I wanted to leave so badly, but I couldn't abandon them. I thought, once they're older, I'll be able to go. My feelings for Heidi had changed. She had hurt me too many times, and staying with her seemed easier than starting over. When Heidi's mother passed away, it seemed to settle her down. After the funeral, when everyone had left and only Heidi and I remained, we had an unusual conversation. Her mother had been buried holding a cigarette. I half expected her to rise and help us with our issues. Heidi looked at me through the coffin and spoke, "James, I'm terrible. I spent my life waiting for something extraordinary to happen to prove I was special. I've cheated on you and our kids more times than you know. For every time you caught me, there were 5 or 6 you didn't. I don't know why I did it. You were always the best lover I ever had. I was a terrible mother and wife, but you stayed. Why? Because I loved you from the first moment I saw you," I answered. "Heidi," I continued, "I loved you too. From that moment in the back seat when you told my mom you loved me and wanted to marry me despite everything. I thought you were too good for me and tried to keep my distance to avoid ruining you. But fate brought us back together. And for the last 25 years, I've been trying to sabotage everything." A tear ran down her face, showing she truly meant it. "James, I will never cheat on you again. From now on, you're my only man. I promise." I believed her. She won me over, and I didn't leave, as I had planned. We had more good years. We made plans for me to retire early so we could travel the world together. We raised 3 amazing children and started taking short trips to discover new places. Even though we were both over 50 and had been together for more than 30 years, we acted like teenagers. It wasn't uncommon for people to catch us kissing passionately in my Mustang. We shared many adventures, and those were the best times of my life. 3 years ago, we decided to try skiing. When we arrived, we saw that all the kids were learning to snowboard instead. So, we decided to learn snowboarding as well. That marked the beginning of the end. Mom started an affair with your ski instructor, didn't she? Dave asked, his frustration evident. So much for her promise. Unbelievable. Can I please finish the story? It's almost done, I said. Sam climbed onto my lap, and I continued. To answer your question, no, your mom didn't have an affair with the ski instructor or anyone else during that trip. In fact, that trip, right until the very end, was one of the happiest memories of our marriage. Imagine spending the entire day with the person you've loved since you were old enough to know what love is. You wake up with her in your arms, share a few lingering kisses, give her a playful pat, and then head to breakfast. You take a ski lesson together, the air crisp and fresh, and every glance at her makes your heart warm. You have lunch, then return to the room, making passionate love until the late afternoon. After that, you prepare for one last run before dinner. I replay that day in my mind because it was the only day of the trip that was perfect. The rest of the trip was full of arguments. Your mom complained nonstop about the chalet being too warm, the outside too cold, the sun too bright, the night too dark, the hills too steep, and even the snow being too white. She found fault with everything, and I think she was wrestling with the fact that she was nearing 60 and no longer the sex symbol she once was. But that last day, well, that was perfect. It made up for all the earlier disagreements. We went for one final descent before dinner, and that's when it happened. Your mom wasn't a skilled skier, so she stuck to the beginner slopes. As we made our way up the hill, we noticed a crew filming a commercial or something like that. Your mom went wild, rolling right through the shot area, unnoticed at first. Lee, the director, was too focused on the models. So your mom, trying to show off despite her lack of skill, attempted some tricks without paying attention and ended up sliding into an entrance for one of the pro tracks. The ski instructor didn't even work on those slopes. One moment, she was posing in front of cameras that weren't focused on her, and the next, she was screaming as she crashed into a tree. It was terrifying. There was a loud, prolonged scream, followed by a heavy thud. The impact was so intense, the tree actually shook. The rescue team was afraid to move her and immediately called for an ambulance. A medevac helicopter arrived and took her to the nearest hospital. Fortunately, we were in Michigan, so we had access to excellent medical facilities. Heidi regained consciousness 3 days later, which was a huge relief because she had undergone 4 surgeries during that time. The first operation was to fix her broken nose, which put her out of immediate danger. The next day, they performed surgery on her spine to address several slipped discs pressing on her spinal cord. Without this surgery, she risked losing mobility or control over her limbs. It was the longest procedure, but the doctors were optimistic she would be able to walk again after recovery. The following day, they inserted pins into her wrists, which had broken when she tried to brace for the impact. Despite numerous bruises covering her face and body, Heidi was otherwise okay. As I mentioned, she woke up within 3 days, and thankfully, her mind was sharp. In hindsight, I wish I had learned more from that experience. Sarah, do you remember when I fell down the stairs while we were putting up Christmas decorations? I asked. Yes, Dad. It was so scary, she replied. What did I say when I came to? I continued. You asked the paramedic about Mom and us, Sarah said. I stayed by your mother's side for 3 full days without leaving, I said. Her first words when she woke up were, damn. Then how do I look? I was so relieved that she was awake, I didn't immediately grasp the gravity of the moment. It took me months to fully process everything. Heidi's hospital was 80 miles from home, and I drove there every day for 4 months straight. When she was finally ready to be discharged, the doctors recommended ongoing care that couldn't be provided at home. They suggested a nursing home or an intensive care facility, and there were several options nearby, one just 10 miles from our house. But Heidi insisted on a facility near East Lansing, almost 90 miles away. I didn't understand why she chose that place. I assumed it was because Sarah was back at college, and maybe Heidi wanted to be closer to her. Perhaps it was also a backup plan for when I had to work, since Sarah's boyfriend, Justin, worked nearby. I continued visiting daily, staying until visiting hours ended. Heidi's stay was supposed to last a month, and while the first 3 weeks went by uneventfully, That was only because I was unaware of what was really going on. I remember one day very clearly. I arrived earlier than usual that morning. Traffic on 696 was lighter than expected, so I sped up and my Mustang raced ahead. Normally, I'd get there around 9 a.m., just after Heidi had been wheeled out for her morning shower. Although she had regained some ability to walk, she was still unsteady, so she was moved around in a wheelchair for safety. The staff probably wanted to avoid any falls before her release. After her shower, she would typically have breakfast and undergo some tests before visiting hours started. Arriving at 8 a.m. was earlier than usual, so my visit was unexpected. Heidi wasn't even in her room when the staff let me in. I decided to surprise her, but ended up being the one surprised. I hid in the small bathroom of Heidi's room. This was one of the happiest times of our marriage. We were closer than ever, even while she was hospitalized. We had plans for our future and dreamed about places to visit. For the first time, I felt sure that Heidi loved me as much as I loved her. It took almost 40 years, but I felt like I had won. After all those years, I finally felt like I had the woman of my dreams. I tried to stifle my laughter when a man wheeled her chair into the room and helped her back into bed. But instead of leaving, he closed the door behind him, as if this was something he did regularly. He walked back to Heidi's bed just as I was about to step out and surprise her. Then, they began to be intimate, trying to keep quiet so the nurses wouldn't hear them. I considered slipping out of the bathroom while they were distracted, but I was too stunned to move. In that moment, lost in my thoughts, I came to the painful realization that your mother would never be the woman I had hoped she could be. My kids were all grown, so I no longer had a reason to tolerate it. The man took Heidi back to the shower so she could clean up again, and I simply left. I drove home, ignoring Heidi's calls that started almost immediately after I left the building. To me, the marriage was over. That same day, I reached out to my lawyer to start the divorce process. I withdrew most of the money from our accounts, leaving her only a couple of $1,000s. I arranged for a quick sale of the house with a realtor. Property values were high in our area, and a broker offered $411,000 for the house, which I accepted. I rented a large condo, a truck, and a trailer. I packed up my belongings, loaded my Mustang onto the trailer, changed my phone number, and left. I wrote 3 letters, one to each of you, and included them with the divorce papers. Since you were all spread out, I knew you'd reach out after receiving the letters. I also included my lawyer's contact details and emails and asked him to share my new phone number with you when requested. This way, Heidi couldn't reach out to me, but you all could. I never expected her to take money from her children or withhold the letters I wrote. Each day, I drove as far as I could, stopping in different states to take in the people and places. I think I was so frustrated that I kept driving until I reached the end of the road. Eventually, I chose to settle in Florida. It had a strong Michigan snowbird community, and even the Tigers held spring training there. I kept to myself, staying inactive for the first year. Realizing Heidi wasn't going to agree to the divorce, I filed for it in Florida. I also started a small property management business, assisting homeowners who lived elsewhere for most of the year with tasks like lawn care or storm preparation. After the first year, I began visiting bars and clubs. I wasn't ready to date, but there were plenty of women my age who showed interest. I met a few women who reminded me of Heidi, and it turned my stomach. Most women my age were a bit heavier, and I realized I was done with the economy class experience. No more women with flat figures for me. That's why I was at the clubs. I was taking stock of the women out there. That's how I met Sam, but that's another story. James, you were never supposed to find out. Heidi sobbed. It's just, you breaking another promise and proving how little I mean to you, she said. Heidi, I replied. I called you repeatedly that day because I thought something had happened to you, I continued. Something happened to me, I said. I'm tired of how you treated me. But James, it meant nothing, Heidi pleaded. Don't you see that after all this time, you're the only man I've ever truly loved? If this is your version of love, then I don't want it, I said. For the first time, I have someone who genuinely loves me. I'm better off without you, Heidi. And now I have my children back and another baby on the way. I suspected something happened that day, Heidi admitted. The nurse told me she saw you go upstairs, she added. Justin turned pale. What does Justin have to do with this, Dad? Sarah asked. He was the one in the room with your mom, I replied. Chaos erupted. Sarah lunged at Justin, who tried to get up and run. David grabbed him and punched him. I tripped Justin, and he fell right in front of Sarah. He managed to break free and fled the house. Kelly and I comforted Sarah for about an hour, while everyone else talked downstairs. After Kelly gave Sarah a couple of sleeping pills, she finally fell asleep. She's seeing a lawyer tomorrow to file for divorce, Kelly said as she returned to the others. We sat in uncomfortable silence until Heidi spoke. James, I've thought a lot over the past 3 years you've been gone. Tomorrow, I'm going to the hospital to see what's wrong with me. I wish you could help me through this. Mom, are you serious? David asked. She's definitely not herself, Sasha added. I want my money now. Write me a check so I can cut you out of my life, or I'll have you arrested before you even get to the hospital. Heidi, you're my husband's mother, Kelly said, but you took advantage of our kindness. We put our lives on hold when you had more than enough to take care of yourself. We accepted you. And no, Kelly, I said. She used you. Heidi only appears when she needs something. She's always been that way. You realized it much sooner than I did. At least we're all together now. You can call me anytime. Why don't you all come to Florida for Christmas? I checked my watch and knew it was time to leave. We'll be there, Dad, David said. Come on, Mom. I'll help you get ready. James, you can't be serious. How can you leave with this girl when I need you? Because she loves him and is loyal to him, Grandma, Sam said firmly. I handed Sam her coat, and she started putting it on. She leaned over and kissed me. James, you won't leave me, Heidi yelled. It'll haunt you. You've always forgiven me, and this time you're still mine. No, Sam said, stepping between us. He's mine now. Have a great day, Sam added. To hell with you, Heidi muttered angrily. We made it to the airport with 20 minutes to spare. The little V6 convertible navigated through the snow, and we arrived in one piece, flying back to Florida. David, Kelly, Sarah, and Sasha came to Florida for Christmas. They had a great time and pampered Sam, whose belly was already noticeably round. Sarah stayed behind, working on rebuilding her life after divorcing Justin. Heidi called them almost daily, but none of them answered. Eventually, she stopped calling altogether. A few weeks later, my lawyer called me for a meeting. Heidi and I had prepared wills before I left, and she never updated hers. Heidi passed away in the hospital alone. Even on her final day, doctors were still trying to diagnose the mysterious illness that had affected her. They suspected it might be similar to the condition that had taken her mother's life at the same age. I split the money equally among my children. The last task was burying Heidi on a rainy day. Most of the attendees left quickly. Surprisingly, Justin was there, likely trying to make amends with Sarah. As the rain intensified, the priest told me we needed to finish because of the weather. I said we would each toss a handful of dirt on the coffin and leave. We all gathered at David and Kelly's house afterward. I think I came out at just the right time to meet the woman who would bring me happiness for the rest of my life. For me, that made everything feel perfect.